I was born June the 15th, 1923, in a little town called Brooks, Iowa. They moved to Kansas City when I was 9 months old, and I lived here all my life.
Yesterday, December 7th.
I was working that Sunday when Pearl Harbor happened, and I heard it coming over the radio.
In infamy.
It's unreal, you know, you just couldn't believe that something like this could happen. Here the Japanese were in Washington, D.C. a day or two ahead of time, and they were planning this whole thing, and nobody in Washington knew what was going on until it actually happened. In the meantime, I went to work for one of these government places, building foot lockers and refrigerators for the war effort. Then I changed careers and I went over to Tension Envelope Company. Then after several weeks, I talked to my buddies and I said, I get sick of this job. I said, let's go down and join the service. I said, we'll probably end up getting drafted later on anyway, so why not join the service? It was November the 25th, 1942, when we enlisted. And we went down to join the Navy. The three of us were going to go join the Navy. So we went down to join the Navy at the recruiting office. And my two buddies were both colorblind, so they wouldn't take them. So we ended up joining the Army Air Corps.
Become a member of the Army Air Corps and take to the skies for a flying punch at the Axis.
My dad picked us up at the Union Station and put us on a bus down to Union Station to go to Fort Leavenworth for induction. A couple of days later, they put us on a train to St. Petersburg, Florida. And I shipped out to Clearwater, Florida for my basic training, and that's the last I saw of my two buddies. After I finished basic, they sent me to Shepherd Field, Texas for airplane mechanic school. I picked mechanic school for my first effort. After 6 weeks in aircraft mechanic school, I was sent to Tyndall Field, Florida for gunnery school training. When I arrived at gunnery school in Tyndall Field, Florida, Clark Gable was in the graduating class ahead of me, and he actually went overseas as a photographer. But after that, then I went into phase training, which they sent me out to western Texas, to a little town called Rattlesnake Bomber Base in Peyote, Texas. After we finished phase training there, they transferred us to Langley Field, Virginia, on the East Coast, and we're looking for submarines, German submarines. That's where we're doing German patrol on submarine bases. After a while, about a month or so later, they sent me to Fort Hamilton, New York, waiting assignment overseas. And after we were there, they sent us overseas on the Queen Mary from Pier 91 out of New York City. And it was January of 1944, and we landed in Scotland. And after that experience, they sent us over to Belfast, Ireland. I was over there, stationed there for 30 days. And after we left there, we went back out for assignment, and I ended up in an outfit called the Carpetbaggers. They were flying night missions in B-24s 50 feet off the ground at night, dropping supplies to the French underground. But I trained in high altitude, and I didn't like the idea that 50 feet off the ground at night in a B-24 bomber. We were buzzing bridges and everything else, and so I applied for transfer to high altitude, and I ended up in Jimmy Stewart's 453rd Bomb Group in the 8th Air Force, 2nd Air Division.
Hello. Gee, looks like I'm back in the movies again, doesn't it? Well, as a matter of fact, I like to do some talking.
Jimmy was my group operations officer, and he would brief us on the missions. And he was about 33 years old at that time, and I was 18, so I was lucky. I got to fly one mission with him. He came along as a co-pilot on my plane, and the plane that I joined was called Partial Payment. And two of the crew members, the enlisted men, were sabotaging their guns to try to abort the missions. They didn't want to fly the missions. The pilot finally found out about it, and he kicked them off the crew. And that's when I came along and was stuck in the ball turret because I was fulfilling one of those guys' duty. Your parachute's laying up in the waist. You got the harness on, but your chest pack is laying up in the waist, so it's a lonesome feeling down there. with your knees up between the twin 50 caliber machine guns and 32 below zero, and you got an electrically heated suit on, and every once in a while you get a hot spot in your uniform. So you always had to keep unplugging the darn thing to keep from burning. The most terrifying mission that I flew on was May the 8th of '44, Harry Truman's birthday. And we put up 48 planes that day, maximum effort for him. And we went to Brunswick, Germany, an aircraft factory in Brunswick, Germany that was called Little B. Big B was called Berlin. And we lost 15 10-man crews that day. That's 150 of my buddies went down on that one mission. And I got my ball turret shot out from under me. A 20-millimeter shell came through the waist of the ship and took out the main power cable on my ball turret. I couldn't fire the guns and I couldn't move the turret. You're laying on the trap door, your back is laying on the trap door of the turret. I had to get the hand cranks out to crank the guns down so I could get out of it into the waist of the plane, because the back door opens up inside the plane so you could climb out of it. So when I got out of it, all I could do after that, during the rest of that mission, was to throw chaff out the chaff chute to throw off the anti-aircraft guns. And chaff was nothing more than Christmas tree icicles that would float down, and they would fool those guys. They would be shooting below us instead of up where we were. And we all wore flak suits, which were big, heavy garments in about 3 different pieces, and they were heavy. And I found a bunch of them on the floor, and I lined them up along the waist of the ship around that chaff chute. And I sat there and threw chaff out the chaff chute while I prayed like a son of a gun. And it was my 8th mission, and I thought, how in the heck am I going to do 30 missions at this rate? But I survived it. So again, I think I had a guardian angel taking care of me on that trip. We prayed every day. You couldn't run a mission without praying that everybody would come back safely, because so many crews didn't. Some of them went through some horrible things. I kept busy between missions painting jackets, my leather jackets, and it took my mind off of the day, each mission and everything. I never thought about it. I was so busy concentrating on my artwork that it never entered my mind that I might not make it. To this day, I still can't believe that I survived all of this. And at the age I am now and in good health, I'm amazed, really. When I first went over, the tour was 25 missions, then they raised it to 30. Then eventually, before the war ended, they raised it to 35, but I got off with 30 missions. I was lucky enough to be considered to have completed my tour. And I came back, I was home for Christmas in 1944. I got to spend Christmas with my family. And after I visited the family and everybody for Christmas, they sent me out to Long Beach, California, to a nursing home for 30 days rest, waiting reassignment. They sent me to San Antonio, Texas. I got my papers for cadets, and I was an aviation student. I finished pre-flight and was waiting to go to primary. And my mother had an emergency operation, and the Red Cross sent me home on a 30-day leave. And when I got back, my class was the last class to go to primary pilot training. So I had my choice of flight engineer, navigator, bombardier school. So I said, well, send me to bombardier school. So they sent me down to Childress, Texas. I transferred to flight engineer school. They sent me to Amarillo, Texas. And when I got down there, we were guarding a bunch of German prisoners down there. And we were there when the war in Japan ended. I was waiting to start class at that time, and the guy come around, and I said, what do you got there? He said, well, he says, Upon completion of this tour here, you got to sign up for another tour in the Pacific. And I said, well, what are my options? He said, well, it's either that or resign from cadets. So I said, okay, give me that other paper. And I had enough points. I was out in 2 weeks in September of 1945. I got home and partied for about 30 days before I went out and looked for a job. And then I wanted to be an artist. And we made the most beautiful art studio in Kansas City at that time. So for 32 years, it was Embassy Studio. Advertising Artists was the name of our company. And I changed careers, and I invented this ladder safety device that I have a U.S. patent on, and it's called Ladder Helpmate. I have 4 lovely daughters and 1 son, and well, I believe I have 8 grandchildren and 11 great-grandchildren, and I think I've got another one on the way, so we'll make an even dozen.
Now, this is your place. This is where you'll serve America best. Young men of America, your future's in the sky. Your wings are waiting.
I was a survivor. I was no hero, but I was just grateful that I was anxious and able to survive my time in the service. And I'm proud that I served my country. And I just feel that I was one of the lucky ones that was able to participate in that period, because I had no thought about it. We joined to try to save the country, and we were lucky enough to survive it all. So, gratitude is all I can speak for.
I wouldn't do it again. Everything I did, I'm glad to do it, proud to do it, but I wouldn't want to do it again. I was born 1922. When I graduated from high school in Milan, Missouri in 1940, I left home, hitchhiked to Wichita, Kansas, which is probably one of the best moves I ever made. And I met my wife there in 1942. When I got to Wichita, I went to work for Beechcraft Airplane Company. Come along about October, and the war was getting pretty heavy, so I decided I'd better join because I'd get drafted. So I joined the Marines, and she said, well, you go to war, I'll wait for you. If you come back, I'll marry you. I left. My thinking was, if I'm going in, I want to go into an outfit that knows what they're talking about. The Army, you didn't know what to expect. When I went to Marine boot camp, this was October, and it was god-awful. You couldn't get any worse. And when you got out, you didn't know whether you're still alive or not. And the first thing I did after I got out of boot camp, I went to Chicago, Navy Pier, to learn about airplanes. We get up in the morning and work on the planes, go to school, instructions, and then they'd give us a project to work on until 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. About 2 or 3 miles down the road was Grant Park. The Marines had a kind of a funny way of saying, you're a specialist, but you got to remember that you're still a Marine and you go out there and fight. You might have to shoot somebody once in a while. So we did a lot of the training while I was there. And then I was shipped to Cherry Point, North Carolina, where the squadron was formed at that time, night fighter outfit, flew by radar. And the planes were new, they were the F-6F Hellcat. We was in Cherry Point then from August of 43 till about April of 44. We formed our squadron, and then we flew to San Diego. And when we got to San Diego, we got on a ship, the Brit, and it was a transport carrier for airplanes. Now we had our planes all cosmolined in and everything buttoned up, and then we sailed for Esprit Santos. It took us about a month to get there. And we was there a month. And then we left there on the Santee, USS Santee, which is a baby aircraft carrier. And then we worked our way up to Marshall Islands and then over to Guam. 2 weeks after D-Day, 44. The 534 Night Fighter outfit, and that was my squadron. Only flew at night. And it was equipped with radar. Radar was new. Nobody knew much about radar. They used F6 or F4Us, they used F6Fs. But it was hardly, you didn't ever see them. It was all pretty secret. Plane captain just worked in the daytime. I got to sleep at night, but I had mechanics. I had 3 mechanics, and they took their shifts at night. Mechanic had to get the pilot and strap him in the plane and start the plane and send him off. Next morning comes it, then I've got to go clean the plane up, all the oil that come out of the engine that's on the fuselage. I had to clean that up, warm the engine up, make sure everything's all right. It was a beautiful plane. I loved it. I loved every part about that airplane. The pilot loved it because you were sitting high enough you could see what you're doing. We never was well acquainted with pilots. You never met them much. They would fly at night and they'd be sleeping during the day. I'd be working on the plane. Now, the only time I really had a contact with pilots if they come back and complained about something wrong with the airplane. Then, of course, I had to talk to them question them a little bit on how it happened. And most of them didn't even know what they were talking about. It just ain't running right. And what it usually turned out to be, he was scared to death to fly at night. I know that one plane I had, a pilot took it out, and I know he kept saying it was rough. Well, I'd check it out on the ground and be fine. Well, he'd take it out, and he got tired of that, so he just ditched it. He just bailed out of it and let it drop in the drink. So when he did that, I didn't have a plane for a while, till they gave me another one. It was a used one then, and I had to fix it up. And the name of the plane was called Song of Bernadette. I think the F6F Hellcat was a fairly easy plane to work on, and it was a very rugged airplane. It took really a terrible pilot to tear him up. I'd been over a year and a half, and then dropped the bomb on Japan. Then went back another day and dropped another one. That was pretty well understood. Everybody knew. It was all over with. I got on my ship, the USS Slowpoke. They call it the Slowpoke. It was after the president. We left there about, it was right after the bomb drops, which was about 9th or 10th of August. And so I left almost a year to the date I got there. So I was on the full year on Guam. And we got on the Poke, and we left there, and on the 2nd day of September, MacArthur was accepting the surrender of the Japanese on the Missouri in Tokyo Bay. That's when I sailed into San Francisco. And when I went into San Francisco, then I went home and married my wife. And when I got back, I emptied my papers and so forth, and here come a lot of rice out. And they said, well, I guess I knew what you did on your leave. I said, yeah, I got married. He said, well, you're married now, you probably got enough points to get out. So they counted him up. He says, yeah, you're a free man, you know. I hadn't even unpacked my trunk. We just loaded back up and come back home, and that was it. I was all done, and I thought, until 5 years later, almost to the day. I got out November the 7th from the Marine Corps, and then November the 5th, 1950, I was back in. When I got out, I knew several of the people in there that was in the ROTC, and so I got my commission, 2nd lieutenant, and then just before I graduated, I got promoted to 1st lieutenant, and then I went into the reserves because I had a son by that time and married a son and going through college, so I needed some money. They didn't have a Navy or Marine Corps reserve, so I had to take the Army, so I took that. And this was in February 1950. In June, the North Korea decided they was gonna fight the South Koreans. And then August, I got a notice from Uncle Sam that says report to Fort Riley, Kansas for examination. When I got home, I had to report to Fort Custer in Michigan, but I had a commission was anti-aircraft. So now I've reported up there and was in the artillery. And then in July of '51, I got orders to go to Sill, Oklahoma, to be converted from anti-aircraft, because there was no aircraft over there, to be a field artillery. Left to go to Korea, about September '51. And when I got over there, I had 6 months and about 2 or 3 days to go. When I went to Korea, of course, I went over there as an MOAS of Forward Observer. That meant that you was right on the front, directing fire on the enemy. Being up there right on the line on the front, you were, have an average life of about 5 days. And so I joined the battery up on Heartbreak Ridge, and was immediately, of course, assigned to a platoon. Each platoon had 8 half-tracks, and mounted on the half-tracks was a gun, a quad, with 4 50 caliber machine guns. So I joined them, and we had to go out and patrol. I was in more danger in Korea than I was in World War II. Because when I went over there, I wouldn't give you a nickel for my life over there when I went over there. I just figured I'd no way I'd be back. And I was there for just about 6 months, I guess. And so on February the 10th, 1952, I'd run up to finally convince them that I was not in the Army anymore. I was about ready to get out. So then I came back home. Got home on the 1st of March, went to Crowder, got my list to get out. When I got out, I went back home, and I got rid of all of that stuff, and that was the last of my fighting. I got out of 2 wars and not got a scratch. So I figured I was ahead, so I just well quit. I was working for Ford Motor Company. They hired me back. They says, okay, you're back now, so go to work. Wound up with 34 and a half years and retired. I worked for 34 years, and I've been retired for 34 years. We were married on September the 14th, 1945. We stayed married until she died 3 years ago. We were married 69 years. We looked for 70, but she didn't make it. Got 2 great kids, 3 grandkids, 6 great granddaughters. I've had a blessed life. Of course, I'm partial to the Marines. They like you saying that's right. If you're once a Marine, you're always a Marine. When I got through training out of boot camp and up at Chicago, I really felt I was trained. I felt tough. I figured I'd take on the world. They treated you like dirt, but by God, you felt like you was a man when you come out of it. I'm sure glad I did it, and I think I'm a better man for it. I wouldn't give it up at all. Wouldn't do it again, but I wouldn't give it up.